Hey folks, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. I'm your host, Paul F. Austin, and today we're exploring how states of ecstasy can be found not just in the medicines we ingest, but through something we all have access to, our breath. In today's episode, I speak with Ava Johanna, who discovered that breathwork could create the same euphoric states she once sought through substances and turn this realization into both personal healing and a thriving business. Ava's journey from corporate burnout to breathwork pioneer offers valuable insights for practitioners and coaches looking to create sustainable, transformation-focused businesses. As founder of the Academy of Breath, she's now certified over 700 practitioners worldwide, blending neuroscience, spirituality, and practical business guidance. What makes Ava's approach unique is her insight into the entrepreneurial side of healing work. Beyond just breathwork techniques, she shares the exact framework that helped her scale from struggling solopreneur to running a six-figure coaching business. Knowledge that's especially valuable for psychedelic coaches and practitioners, including those who have gone through our own training program, who are looking to build sustainable practices. I actually met Ava through her show Icons with Ava Johanna, where we had a fantastic conversation about psychedelics and leadership and what I learned about her background blending spiritual practice with business acumen. I knew she would bring an invaluable perspective to our community of practitioners and guides. One thing that really stood out to me in our conversation was her concept of trauma-aware sales, an approach that honors the sensitivity and vulnerability inherent in transformational work while creating genuine and ethical paths to serving more people. All right, that's it for now. Let's get into my conversation with Ava Johanna. So breath is something that we do every day. We breathe every basically second, every minute, every hour. And yet breath work is a very different practice in many ways. It's a much more intentional practice. And I'd love to just open our conversation today with hearing you talk a little bit about why breath work. Why is it that you chose to focus on breath work as a modality? And what has it meant to you from a personal practice perspective?
Yeah, kind of going back to what you were sharing earlier around my background, in my early 20s, I hit the ground running hard in the corporate world. And it was very much the story of just climb the corporate ladder, try to get the next promotion. And in the process, I was severely burnt out and had no idea how to take care of myself. And so I would work hard Monday through Friday, stay at the office, 10 to 12 hours and live for the weekends, and got into some really unhealthy behaviors and patterns within my lifestyle where I would be either drinking nonstop over the weekend, taking recreational drugs throughout the weekend, and always searching for that high that, after doing more deep healing work, realized was me trying to find some level of relief and escapism as well as numbness from the very real experience of feeling so disconnected and feeling so out of alignment with who I am, what I'm meant to be doing, and just living a happy and fulfilled life. And so in my early 20s, I partied a lot. I mean, I spent every single paycheck on drinks, drugs, raves, festivals. And I remember reaching this point of burnout where I had migraines every other week that would last sometimes up to 3 days, where I was calling out of work or going into work hungover. And it was, while I didn't have the term at the time, very much a dark night of the soul for me, where my girlfriend dragged me into a yoga class. And it was the first time that I felt any level of relief that didn't require any outside substances. And I had this moment while I was lying in Shavasana, just like dripping in sweat, where I thought to myself, God, I just want to make other people feel as good as I feel right now. And enrolled in a yoga teacher training months after that. And on the very first night of the yoga teacher training, we did Wim Hof's breathwork. And I remember calling my girlfriend and saying to her, Lily, I have no idea where I just went, but I was able to create that same level of ecstasy that the drug ecstasy would create for me. And I just want to learn everything that I can about breath work because I didn't realize that I could feel this good without ingesting anything. And so for me, it was honestly chasing this high that I didn't know that I could give myself. And then once I was able to create that on my own with my breath, wanting to learn all of the ins and outs of what was actually happening within my body, within my nervous system, and then also from a spiritual lens, where was I going? What was I connecting to? And so breathwork really was this almost replacement tool that took an unhealthy pattern and an unhealthy habit and turned it into something that actually became healthy and productive and allowed for me to give myself so many of the things that I was missing in my everyday life just through the breath alone. And I really connected with the fact that, if you are living, you are breathing. And so this is a tool that we all have access to, and it doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter your race, your sexuality, your religion. You have the ability to utilize your breath in a way that can not only shift how you feel emotionally, but physically, spiritually, mentally as well. And to me, it just felt like the most accessible gateway to transformation, regardless of what your starting point is.
Because we all breathe, right? And for some people, psychedelics may be intimidating, cold plunges may be intimidating, even just straight meditation and sitting on the cushion. It may not be super intimidating, but people don't really get much from it. And I find breathwork is sort of this perfect middle ground where if you commit to the practice, you're going to notice some pretty substantive change in your subjective experience immediately. And it's something that you can titrate and control yourself. So if it feels overwhelming or if it feels like too much, you can always take a step back and just stop hyperventilating for a minute, and things will sort of calm down and come back into focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that so many people, because we live in such a high-strung, overachieving type A society, need something to do. And that's why meditation can be really intimidating, because being in stillness, silence, having to deal with the discomfort of actually meeting your mind, that's really intimidating and challenging for people. And so I know for me it was. And I remember, sitting down to meditate the first couple of times and just setting a 5-minute timer and like constantly peeking my eye open to see where was I at in the 5 minutes, because it was just so uncomfortable. And breathwork was actually the one tool that allowed for me to find more comfort in stillness and also find more safety actually exploring my mind in a way that I hadn't before.
Mm. So you get into breath work or you get into yoga, that brings you into breath work. And at this point, you're still working in a corporate landscape. You're experiencing these symptoms of burnout, which, as many of us know, are not pleasant. What inspired you then to take a leap, to quit your corporate job and really commit to breath work, becoming a practitioner and an entrepreneur? What inspired you to take that leap, and what challenges did you have to navigate in that transition point?
Still so many challenges, as you
Yeah.
know, Paul. So, the first thing for me was that as I was diving deeper into breathwork and yoga and wellness and mindfulness, I really took to changing my environment and my surroundings, which was really important because, again, I came from a background of partying on the weekends, not the highest quality relationships around me. And so the first piece was really subjecting myself to different community, different environments, actually changing the way that I was living my everyday life. And in doing so, that really opened my eyes up to different forms of how people were living, and that the corporate 9-to-5 job wasn't the only way. And, I remember having so many moments before walking into my corporate job where I would think to myself or be on the phone with my mom saying, I can't believe, like, there's got to be more than this. And I think that that's such a sign for anybody that's listening to this conversation. If you're thinking to yourself, there's got to be more than this, that's the invitation to explore what does that more actually look like? And what does it look like to follow that little intuitive nudge that's telling you there's more to life than what your current surroundings are? And so very simply, I started, because I didn't have that much money at that time, listening to podcasts, reading books, going to workshops at the yoga studio. And all of those little micro changes that I made me realize that I had the ability to alter my life path and that I didn't have to stay stuck in a corporate job. And my background is in digital marketing and branding, and I was doing it for, you live in San Diego, so you know the San Diego Reader that's outside of the 7-Elevens and the grocery stores. So I helped them launch their digital agency back in 2012, I think it was, and was basically managing these campaigns for car audio shops, dentists, all of these random mom and pop businesses around San Diego, and gaining a really valuable skill set in understanding social media, web development, graphic design, email marketing, SEO. And as I was going on my own wellness journey, I realized, I'm gaining all of these really valuable skills that I could actually just apply to building my own business. And at the time, I watched a lot of YouTube videos of vloggers that would go and travel the world and go to all these epic places. And I said, I want that. And I think I'm going to start to work to create that. And so it started as a blog that I would secretly do at my cubicle at my 9 to 5. And as I was going through my yoga teacher training, I realized, by the end of this training, I'm going to quit my job and I want to move to South America. And I'm going to go be a digital nomad. And I'll start freelancing and just find some businesses that I can do social media and marketing for that are more aligned with the wellness space and holistic healing. But that was really that first big leap of faith that I took. And, I think the biggest challenge with it was not fully understanding all that goes into actually running your own business and having the discipline really to show up when no one else is holding me accountable, when I don't have to clock in and clock out, when, there's not a manager breathing down my neck, making sure that I'm hitting specific milestones or showing up to meetings. And that was definitely one of the hardest pieces that I had to learn, is that you need to be a self-starter if you're starting your own business, and you need to know how to generate that level of discipline and devotion to your work, because in the beginning, it is really challenging to set up a structure for yourself to show up and do the things when no one's watching over you.
Yeah, that's a really important point, that the capacity to do the work when no one is looking. And I think even sort of more importantly, to do the work when there's no immediate payoff or gratification, right? That a lot of the time and energy and effort that you put in as an entrepreneur, especially in the early stages, you don't know if it's going to pay off. You don't know if you're ever going to become successful. You don't know if this is just a huge waste of time, money, and effort. And so to continue to go irrespective of that, all those doubts, takes someone who is a little different, a little unique, And I think my question for you, my follow-up question is, when was this? When was this? 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago that you made this leap?
About 9 years ago.
So 9 years ago. Okay, so we were about, I was also 2014, 2015. I moved to Thailand and was a digital nomad, and that's when I launched my first online business and all that. What might sort of shifting from a more traditional job environment to becoming an entrepreneur and reflecting back, what might you have changed or done differently with now the sort of hindsight that you have over the last 10 years? So before really making that leap like you did, would you have done anything differently now compared to what you did prior?
Yeah, I think it really comes back to what you were just sharing around the awareness that things don't happen overnight, and you're not necessarily going to have instantaneous results. And you do have to be a little bit delusional and be built differently to have the emotional resilience and fortitude to hold out, even if things don't necessarily pay off immediately. And I have struggled with anxiety my entire life. It's another reason why breathwork has been so powerful for me. And that anxiety really manifested as impatience in the first, I would say, 3 years of my business, where I was really white knuckling to every single email, every single social media post, every single launch, every single sales call. And if things didn't go as planned, all of those negative stories would pop up in my mind of, I'm not good enough, it's not going to work out for me, maybe I'm just not meant for this. I literally would go into my ex's office every single day and just cry and say, maybe I should go back to a corporate job. And so there was this emotional roller coaster that I really let take me on a ride for the first several years of my business, that with the experience I have now, I would have really focused on more so in mastering in those early years, because at the end of the day, the milestones aren't necessarily few and far between, but it's not what makes up the majority of the journey. And, we talk a lot about enjoying the journey versus the destination. And I think that's a really important aspect of entrepreneurship, that if you're signing up for it, you have to be okay with. And I think that especially in the world of social media, where it's a highlight reel, people share their wins, they're sharing how they just, had this crazy launch or signed this epic client or filled out their retreat or whatever it might be. It's easy to feel like you're behind. It's easy to compare yourself. It's easy to measure what other people are doing against what you are doing or your results. But one of my favorite quotes from one of my mentors is, "You are on a mountain with no peak." And that is the perfect analogy for entrepreneurship, especially in this space when we are all growth-oriented individuals. Growth is in our DNA. There's always going to be another level. There's always going to be something more that we want. And when you realize that there's no peak in entrepreneurship, there's no peak in building your business, it's just a constant evolution of showing up, of being of service, of new ideas, new visions, new ways to evolve within your work, then that perspective doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be impatient, doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have those moments of discouragement, but it at least adds context to what the journey actually looks like, so that those little moments that feel like you're falling down or feel like a failure or feel like you're not quite getting things to click into place at the speed that you'd want to, don't necessarily pull you down at the level that they might have you not had that type of perspective. And so for me, that was the biggest thing, that if I could go back, I wouldn't just be focusing on what are the material results or those milestones that I want to hit, but how can I actually prep my emotional state, my mental state, to just be ready for what entrepreneurship and like big levels of success actually require.
Which breathwork also does in many ways from a physiological perspective, right? It can help to actually expand the capacity for our nervous system to hold more responsibility as we step into sort of a greater, literally more expanded sense of self.
Yeah, I was having this conversation in our advanced training earlier this week. One of the women wants to start speaking on stages and really focusing on public speaking, which for a lot of people, it can be terrifying to get up in front of a room and be able to articulate yourself and know that there's, hundreds, if not thousands of people watching you. And one of the practices that we really focus on is that conscious arousal of the nervous system, so that you're priming yourself in how to respond when those heightened emotions and those heightened states do arise, because they will. And when you teach yourself how to respond, how to regulate, how to create that safety in a neutralized environment, in a safe environment that you are consciously creating, then when you actually go to do the thing, it doesn't feel like it's this big feat. It actually feels normal and patterned into your system, so that you can show up and hold the responsibility at that stretched capacity.
That's well said. So one of the core intentions as to why I wanted you to come on the podcast is because I think you do a really good job of articulating and communicating this journey from starting out as a coach to actually being able to generate a living and an income, right? How do we go from 0 to 100K? And we have a lot of folks who go through our practitioner training program. Some who are established coaches have clientele, they're working with clientele, but quite a few folks who are making that leap from corporate or clinical or a background where they've been employed and now they're really out on their own. And I would say the biggest challenge that we have is not so much the practice itself of how we work with breath or psychedelics or meditation, whatever it is, but how do we actually generate a client base and make a living from this? And so I'd love to start to enter that segment of the conversation and maybe just start from a very high level. When you teach this in your own training, practitioner training, when you have students who ask you about it, what are some of the principles and perspectives that you provide about how do we actually make a living as coaches and practitioners who are utilizing breath, who are working with psychedelics, who are in the sort of transformational coaching space?
Yeah. So we're going to go in a lot of different directions, but I think it's going to be really valuable. Cool. So on a high level, there's really three main things that you need to focus on. The first is the actual offer itself and making your offer, I like to call it, exist within a market of one, where somebody doesn't look at your offer as just another breathwork facilitator or just another psychedelic facilitator, but you've created what I like to call the bulletproof offer that can't be commoditized and it can't be compared to anything else. And the reason we do that is because when people see an offer that everyone else is offering, they're often going to compare it via price and the actual deliverables. But when you have an offer that is incomparable because it's not based on price or deliverables, but it's based on value and transformation, then there's no race to the bottom or need to compete with anybody else in your niche or your industry. And so that's really the first thing that I focus on with my clients is getting them away from selling the modality and guiding them towards selling the actual transformation. And that's going to look different based upon who your ideal client is and who you want to support. And so the way that you would create a program for a high-level executive is very different than the way that you would create a program or an offering for a stay-at-home mom. And so understanding, one, first and foremost, who you're speaking to and who you want to support. I know if you're listening to this podcast and if you're a facilitator, you know that you can support everybody, but that's not the point, and that's going to make it much more challenging to sell. But understanding who it is that you're supporting, what they are experiencing in their life, their current state, their desired reality, the problems that they have, the problems that they'll have in the future, all of those questions are so important to be able to answer on such a specific, granular level, because ultimately, the way that you develop your program is meant to address those specific needs, specific desires, and the transformation or end result that your ideal client wants. And when you can do that, again, there's no competition, there's no comparison, there's no need to outprice other people in your niche because you are your niche and there is no one that is doing what you're doing. And so that's really the first aspect of it. The second aspect of it is understanding sales. And in this industry specifically, trauma-aware sales, because we're not just selling a car, we're not just selling a software, we're selling transformation. And often we're selling transformation, often if not every time, we're selling transformation to people who have experienced trauma with a big T, a little t, where they're bringing in their old habits, their patterns, the past experiences that they've had. Perhaps they've been burned by a past facilitator or have had a bad experience with healing work. And so the way that I teach my clients is really sales through the trauma-aware lens so that the level of safety and integrity that you have within your actual container itself is actually translated from that very first touch with somebody, whether it's on a discovery call or in your content itself. So the sales aspect is really big. And I think that that's a piece that a lot of people struggle with because no one wants to be salesy. No one wants to feel like the person on the other end thinks that they're just lining their pockets. And unfortunately, if you're running a business, you are also your salesperson. And so you have to fall in love with sales. And the way that we teach sales through this trauma-aware lens makes it feel much more authentic and genuine than just trying to slang a product or get as many people in the door. So
help me understand the trauma-aware lens. I think you've articulated it reasonably well, but I'm also just, I myself do a lot of sales calls. We have salespeople who help with our enrollment, program advisors is what we call them. what might be some of the distinctions and differences in terms of the questions that we ask, or how we follow up, or the pain points that we focus on, or I would love if you could bring maybe a little bit more granularity or detail to this trauma-aware sales lens, because I think it's a really salient point and one I haven't really heard talked about or articulated all that much.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first piece is that when you are going into selling a container or transformation, assume nothing. And oftentimes when people are selling or new to sales, it's let me just talk about how amazing my product is and my program and how it's going to get you these epic results and it's going to solve all of your problems. But there's so much assumption when you go in talking about me, this program, this program, this program. And so the first aspect of trauma-aware sales, assuming nothing, means that we are approaching our entire communication through the lens of understanding, which it sounds like that your program advisors already do. A lot of question-based selling to just understand who this person is, what's actually motivating them to get on a call. Because as you allow for them to disclose, what their motivation is, why they're actually in a position to desire this type of work, then you'll have a much better grasp on how your program can actually support them and what their needs really are. And that's the number one piece that I think a lot of people miss as it relates to the sales process, is that we don't actually know why somebody's getting on a call. I could get on a call with somebody that wants to learn breathwork purely for their personal practice. And it would be a disservice for me to just go into, and I'm going to teach you how to make a 6-figure living from breathwork and build a brand online, because that's not actually what they care about. And so there's this level of empathy that comes in through more conversational, question-based selling that allows for there to be stronger trust built, more rapport, because you're taking the time to actually learn about the person and get to know them and what their needs are, versus just assume that you know everything that they need. And what we've found is that it creates a level of intimacy that, again, communicates the safety in making that investment. And so that's the first piece. And then the second piece is not pressuring people to make a sale, right? And also knowing if a program or a container isn't actually right for them, and offering them the space to explore what would be right for them and what is necessary in order for them to be able to be successful. So I'll give a tangible example of that. I was on a call with somebody in January speaking about my program, and I could tell that she wasn't super excited in her business. And she was excited about the program, but I could tell that there was a disconnect where she didn't have time, she wasn't clear, she wasn't really excited about running a business. And I asked her, I was like, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at with excitement? Because, entrepreneurship isn't easy. And I'm never going to sell anybody into a program if they're not fully bought into their own business. And she told me, I'm at like a 6 right now. And I said, I'm not going to try and pitch you on my program if you're at a 6. Can I ask you why just a 6? What would get you to a 10? And she disclosed what would get her to a 10. And I said, amazing. Based on those responses, I think there's some inner work for you to do before us to really be able to do some magic together or create some magic together. And so I'm going to just give you some free resources, and why don't we actually just touch base in a couple months? And so it's that level of actually caring about the individual and the body in front of you that I think is often missed in a lot of sales, that allows for people to actually feel like they're building a relationship with the salesperson or building a relationship with the entrepreneur versus just being sold into a program. And so those are really the ways in which we bring that trauma-aware lens into the sales experience, because at the end of the day, the way that somebody enters your program is often the energy that they're going to bring into the program. And so I want people to be 100% all in, excited, know that this is the space for them, because that's where we're going to get the best results.
Yeah, that's well articulated. I've also heard it referred to as more, I mean, this word is overused, conscious sales. It's how we've always done sales with our training program, leading with questions. And oftentimes the balance with sales is in the follow-up and that cultivation of trust and the alignment. I'm really glad you brought that up, because one thing that we often teach in our training program as well is knowing who you're a great fit for and who you're not a great fit for. And that comes back to the first principle that you talked about, which is being a niche, having a bulletproof offer, ensuring it's not just a commodity, but it's a transformational, it's a transformational process or outcome even that you're bringing through. And that's a note that I wrote down as you were talking about that, right? Process versus outcome, modality versus what you're helping someone to step into. And I think that's a really important point as well. What's the third principle then, Ava?
Yeah, client experience. And so I think that a lot of times in the business space, hiring a business coach, joining a course, it's all about sales, 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 marketing, marketing, marketing. But often there's not conversations happening around, once people are in, how do you create such a world-renowned experience that they never want to leave? And I think you know just as well as I do, and anyone listening as well, it's very hard to find a good mentor or a good coach that you want to stick around with long term. And having somebody that you do want to stick around with long term is so valuable, because they get to know you. There's a relationship there. They understand your blind spots, your patterns. They've seen your journey as well. And having that long-term mentorship and long-term support is, for me at least, what has been the most valuable, because it's not just a quick exchange. It doesn't feel transactional. And so the last piece that I feel needs to be spoken about a lot more, that is spoken about, I would say, in more facilitator trainings, is client experience. And, how do you actually create a world-class client experience that is built upon the foundation of integrity, safety, trust, putting your client's interests first. And from there, inevitably what ends up happening is you have higher client retention, more case studies and testimonials because your people are getting great results, and higher lifetime value of your clients as well too. And so I kind of look at it as like this 3-pillar approach, where marketing, advertising, program development, sales is like the exterior of your house, and then client experience is the interior of your house. If you're trying to sell a house for multi-million dollars, you can't have a dumpy interior while having a beautiful exterior, unless you live in Carlsbad. And Southern California. Hey, the housing market out there is insane. But
I like my condo, okay?
Yeah,
it's got a cute little patio in the back.
I bet it is. No, but in Southern California, you look at the exterior of a house, it's gorgeous, but then it needs so much work on the inside, and you're like, what? Why am I paying all this money for this home? And our experiences are that way as well too. Our containers are that way too. You want there to be congruency between what people are seeing and being marketed to on the outside, but then also what they're experiencing on the inside. Because if there's not congruency there, you're going to have a whole lot of unhappy people that don't actually engage in the process, don't want to re-sign with you or move into other offers that you have, or retreats or trainings. And then also a really poor brand reputation.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes when I'm asked about growing a practice and a business as a coach, there's like 2 aspects to it. One is just getting it up and off the ground, right? And so I think talking about this bulletproof offer and conscious sales, and then the client experience then starts to transition from, okay, I can get this up and off the ground, but now how do I actually get the flywheel going? Because a lot of the best coaches or practitioners don't really do much sales or marketing because their word of mouth is so strong. So if they have someone in their network who also knows that they may need support, they will introduce. And I think coaching is one of those things. I mean, this is true of all businesses, but I would say in particular for solopreneurs, practitioners, and coaches, the absolute best way to build a business is to over-deliver on value and ensure that that client experience is out of this world, because that will be the best way to develop a long-term sustainable business as a practitioner.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that there's so much emphasis on more, right? I need more clients. I need more followers. And in truth, there's so much abundance that you can create and trust that you can create with the people that are already here. And if the people that are already here aren't moving in the way that you want to, I think that it's a really great opportunity to turn inward and reflect on, well, how can I improve what I'm doing in order to work with what is here, and then focus on the more afterwards? Because, you could have 100,000 followers, but if you have a crap experience on the inside, those 100,000 followers aren't going to stick around and actually continue to work with you or continue to buy from you.
So let's make this a little bit more practical then. You have, I believe it's the Academy of Breath, which I love as a name. Tell us a little bit about your offers and specifically, like, as someone who was fairly new to this, how did you make that leap from 0 to 100K? Like what was that process like for you, and what sort of lessons did you learn in that process that you would share with others, going from nothing to six figures as not only a coach and practitioner, but I'd say even more so as an entrepreneur, because you're selling trainings, which is a little bit different than just selling coaching packages.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest mistake that I see a lot of facilitators make in the beginning that gets them stuck underneath the 100K is really just focusing on single sessions and one-offs. And while that can be a really great way to get experience under your belt, it is next to impossible to actually scale. And so the thing that I shifted within my own business that made the leap from 0 to 100K was focusing on a scalable offer, as well as more high ticket premium pricing. And with that, again, it's much easier to make $100,000 in a year if you have a 20 clients at a 5K package, right? Than offering $200 single sessions where you need, I can't do the math that fast, way more people in the door. And so those were the two main changes that I made. Was one, I raised my prices and I created a container, a bulletproof offer that was worthy of that price point. And then two, I added in a more scalable offer where I wasn't necessarily trading time for money anymore and was able to serve more people in a larger capacity, and also still charge a more premium price for it. And so those were go ahead.
Well, and I think this is one of the biggest unlocks. We have quite a few people who come into our training who have been clinicians, therapists, psychologists, nurses, doctors even. So they're so used to this time-based model. And I think one of the biggest distinctions between clinical therapeutic work and coaching or performance or leadership is you are getting paid for value, not time. And the more that you can anchor in that value, refine that value, get really clear on how it can be delivered in an epic way, the easier it is to get your price point up. This is, I think, for any coach or practitioner, and sometimes to start, you have to be charging hourly because it's a good way to like get the traction going and the momentum going. But as soon as you can go to package deals and focus on outcome and value, the easier your whole life is going to become.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to, again, the bulletproof offer, right? When you are focused on selling the transformation itself, people aren't going to like start to do the math in their head of, oh, well, I'm getting 4 sessions a month and that breaks it down to $600 an hour, because you're not focused on saying like, hey, we're going to be doing 4 sessions, 4-hour sessions, right? Like when you're focusing on the deliverables, that's when it's really hard to wrap your head around charging higher ticket premium pricing for packages. But when you think about the transformation, I mean, this work is priceless. It's not just the 3 months or 6 months that you're working with somebody where their life is changing. It's the rest of their life. And so when you get into those more tangible takeaways, then it's so much easier to get behind charging a more premium price and also shifting out of that single session or hourly based model, which, as everyone that is in this space should know, isn't actually the route for true lasting transformation anyways. We're working with the nervous system. We're working with patterns. It takes a period of time to actually have that lasting transformation stick, very similar to microdosing, Paul. And so it's actually a disservice to be offering just single sessions or just hourly opportunities for people to work with you, because you're not really going to get them those big lasting results that lead to people, raving about the work that they're doing with you.
And so how has that played out with Academy of Breath? Bring us a little bit deeper then into the structure and flow. How have you, for our training program, we have a 10-month certification program. We also have a one-to-one coaching program that folks can enroll to get coached before they become coaches. But I'm curious for you, how you've sort of thought through the structure and the process of scalable offer versus sort of, premium value with potential one-to-one clients.
Yeah. So I like to call it our ecosystem. In every business, there is an ecosystem of offers that you can create. And ultimately, what it is how can I ascend somebody through my world? And where is this person initially starting at versus what's the next issue or what's the next goal? And how can my work address that next desire, that next goal that they have? And so we started out as the 12-week breathwork and meditation certification program, really focused more so on the basics of the nervous system, understanding the spiritual origin of these practices, zeroing really in on pranayama as the foundation, because I also do believe that if you are facilitating deeper breathwork journeys, that doing it in a 3-month or learning it all in a 3-month period doesn't necessarily set you up for being able to be the most powerful facilitator that can hold those deeper emotional releases. And so in the 12-week certification, we're really focusing more on foundational breathwork, the type of tools that you can incorporate into your core modalities, whether it's energy healing, body work, coaching, etc. And while I was running that certification over the first several cohorts, I was just paying attention. I was paying attention to the questions that were being asked. I was paying attention to, again, what those next steps were for people after they finished the certification, and, how are they feeling by the end of it? And it turned out that a lot of the desires past the point of certification were implementation into business. And given that I was doing business coaching on the side, it made sense for me to start to build out a facilitator specific business coaching program that really takes, the pillars that we just talked about and helps them after the point of certification be able to build a predictable and scalable business in the online space. And so for me, it's always just been paying attention to where my clients are at and their actual journey, and evolving the product suite or the ecosystem to really be able to continue to support their needs. And so the business coaching then turned into, well, wow, people are asking a lot about facilitating longer journeys and wanting to learn even more about breath work. And this is something that I do within my own practice and my own facilitation when I'm teaching. So why don't we actually create a more advanced, intimate mentorship for those people that want to go deeper and don't just want to use breathwork as like a little side modality alongside their core offering, but really see themselves as being, world-renowned facilitators, the best of the best in the space. And so that's really where the advanced practitioner training was born, about 2.5 years into the initial 3-month training. And so those are really the 3 products that we offer: the certification on its own, the certification plus the business, and then the advanced practitioner training for those that have gone through the certification or other breathwork certifications as well, but have like a baseline understanding of breathwork that want to advance their teaching skills, their leadership skills, space holding, their voice, and really develop their own signature methodology of how they use the modalities.
So we spent a lot of our time talking about entrepreneurship. And I will say this for our audience, I'm sure people who have a marketing background can pick up on it. You're clearly a very talented marketer. And I say that with like genuine love. Like I love the articulation, the flow that you're following. I'm learning quite a bit. I'm just sort of reflecting on our own program and the shifts and changes. And you also have a huge heart, and you're a great practitioner. So more so than just the entrepreneurial side, what is it that you love about the practice itself and the teaching and the training? Like what has you committed to this from a mission perspective, and has you so in love with doing these trainings and these teachings and these mentorships?
Yeah, thank you. The first piece I shared a little bit earlier, which is the accessibility aspect of it. when I was a teenager, my mom, my sister, and I were evicted from our little tiny 1-bedroom apartment in LA and on food stamps and, didn't know where we were going to be sleeping from night to night. And I've been in a space of deep financial poverty and understand that the playing field isn't level. And even as a white woman saying that, I'm still incredibly privileged for the color of my skin and where I was born. But the playing field isn't really level in terms of healing work opportunity. And so that first piece around just accessibility was always really big for me, knowing that, wherever you are in the world, you have your breath and you have this gift that can really help you change the way that you think and change the way that you feel and change the way that you act. And what an incredible gift that we have the ability to be reborn over and over and over again without needing anything outside of ourselves. And so that's always been a really big piece for me. But, the other piece for me, and I just did a breathwork journey last Thursday that one of my girlfriends led. And to me, this is the one space, not the one space, but one of the main spaces where we can connect to God, the universe, higher self, whatever you believe in, whatever you want to call it, and feel that state of oneness, bliss, and connection that I think is so easy to be disconnected from, especially as business owners when we're just constantly thinking about growing in sales and selling and, helping our clients and being of service. And so for me, having a practice in my back pocket that just is there to help me remember what this is all for, remember who I am, remember why we're all here, unlock, the secrets of the universe through a 30 to 40 minute practice is one of the greatest gifts that we have. And, I was sharing this with my group the other day. I think that God planted breath inside of us as a gift to remember. And so that's where I always come back into just deep reverence and respect for this practice because it's changed my life in so many different ways, whether it's healing old belief systems, discovering new aspects about myself, connecting to God. It's just been so multidimensional in how it's changed my life. And to me, I want everybody to have that gift.
Well, thank you for sharing that gift and bringing people into it. It's been fun to connect with you again and share a little time on our podcast this time around. Super helpful. I came away learning something new, which isn't true necessarily of every podcast, true of most, but not every. And this one was very timely in many ways. So I appreciate you being so generous with sharing everything that you've shared. If folks who are listening live or listening to the podcast after, if they want to find out more about Ava and her work, your website is Ava Johanna, JOHANNA.com. So avajohanna.com. We'll have a link to that on our website as well if you want to check that out. And then Academy of Breath is easy, academyofbreath.org. For more details on the certification program and some of the mentorship programs that Ava has. Any other sort of resources or places that you'd love to point people before we wrap up? I mean, your podcast as well, Icons with Ava Johanna is another one. Anything else that you'd love to?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram as you kind of called out. And so I love just sharing tons of value there, lots of how-tos, tips, and just inspiration as well for business owners, specifically in the health and wellness space. But even if you're not, there's still value there. And so my Instagram is at Ava Johanna.
And any final words or perspectives or guidance or advice that you'd love to share with our audience before we close the podcast today?
Yeah, I mean, just based off of this conversation, just anybody listening, like you've got this. If you have the seed planted inside of your heart to start a business in the health and wellness space, in the facilitation space, in the psychedelic space, listen to that. Like there is so much wisdom and intelligence in your intuition and your heart that sure, the mind may not logically be able to explain, but what I've found in my journey is that voice, one, will never go away. If it's bugging you right now, it's not going to go away. And 2, it's safe for you to trust yourself. It's safe for you to trust that voice.
Thank you, Ava. I appreciate you taking the time. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in for another episode of the Psychedelic Podcast. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on the intentional and responsible use of psychedelic medicine.